Well, happy Mother's Day. My goodness, the Lord did something real special when He came up with this mother thing. Way back. I think it's so appropriate that we have a day dedicated to our moms. I think a lot about my mom. She's been gone for 10 years and still have a lot of fond memories. I guess I always will. And regardless of whether your mom's still with us, give it a little thought. The Lord, He made mothers special. And it doesn't make no difference what kind of mother it is. It doesn't matter, mother elephants, you don't mess with their babies. You find out what they're made of. All the way down to a little banny hen. You don't mess with her chicks, Leave her alone. And I think about that. Just that special thing. That mothering instinct that we all should have that great respect for. An old doe deer, they're having babies this time of year. You'll start seeing them. And she'll run from you most of the time. But if you mess with that baby, you'll find out what she's made out of. And my brother-in-law, he's long gone, but he found that out the hard way. And he told this story, and he stuttered real bad. And he couldn't talk very plain, but he'd tell this story about he was going down the road one day, and he had this little S10 pickup, and he saw this baby deer in the grass beside the road, and he stopped. He's going to get that baby deer. It's been years ago. And he was kind of a tall, slender, skinny fella. And he looked up, and he had a hold of that baby deer, and that baby deer was making a lot of noise. And here come that doe down the road, on a gravel road. He let go of that baby deer, and that doe chased him around that pickup, and he couldn't get the door open because she was after him. Finally, he got down. He decided if he had been a fat guy like me, he would have never been able to crawl underneath that S10 pickup. But he had to crawl underneath it to get away from her. And so you find out. And I think, even alligators will protect their nest, fiercely. And that's the thing, the special thing that all the males in any species don't really understand so much, but mothers do. Mothers get that. And, of course, human mothers, above and beyond. Proverbs 14, verse 1. The proverb writer says a wise woman, builds her house, but a foolish pulls it down with her hands. And I think about that. There's no statement. It takes a lot of living to make a house a home. And that's kind of what this sermon's about a little bit today. About all the things that we get in the home from mothers. And the special touch that they bring. The things that Mama wants for her children. What I want to talk a little bit about today. One is she doesn't want her child to be alone. Now I can remember this when our kids were little, and it was a concern. Even them on the playground. She didn't want them kids playing by themselves. She wanted them to have friends. And how many times do mothers pray for the spouse that special person decades before they come along that they want for their son or their daughter. You know, all of these things are a concern to mothers. Maybe if they're going to college, and some of our seniors are going to college, their roommate. That's a pretty important thing to pray about, isn't it? You know, you want somebody there to be a good influence. All of these things that mothers have in mind, and sometimes we as fathers, that just goes right over our head. But mothers are concerned about all of this. Every aspect of a child's life. In Ecclesiastes, in chapter 4, verse 9 and 10, Solomon writes, 2 are better than one because they have good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for has no one to help him up. Mothers don't want their children to be alone. They want them to be happy in life. And that's just one part of it. In Acts chapter 17, verse 26 and verse 27 of Acts chapter 17, this is part of what the Apostle Paul says. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. Now, what good mother does not want her child to seek the Lord? If you're a mother, and your child comes to Christ, obeys the gospel, becomes a Christian, that takes a tremendous load off of your shoulders. And I think any Christian mother wants that for her child. And I can't imagine not wanting that for your child, even as a father. Boy, the things we pray about, the important things. In Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 5, the writer says, let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have, for he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Folks, we have to instill in our children, as mothers and fathers, that God is always with them. That's pretty important to come to that understanding in your life. That God loves you. That he cares for you. He wants the best for you. I understand. None of us wants our children to go through this life alone. And none of us certainly wants our children to go into eternity without a relationship with the Lord. A good mother wants her child to be protected. Now, I talked about the animal world, how mothers in the animal world, they're pretty adamant about this. Human mothers are no exception when it comes to the protection of their children. They don't want them to go hungry. They don't want them to go out in the cold without their coat. They want to make sure they wear socks. Sometimes those socks are even mates. They want them to have their shoes on the right feet, don't they? Fathers, not so much. We don't worry so much about the socks being mates. Some of y'all probably wearing socks today that are not mates. You might even have your shoes on the wrong feet. 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8. Paul says to Timothy, "But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his own household or of those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." You might have a translation that uses the word infidel. We provide for our children. Do we not? I told this story before, and I think it's one of the best stories that I've ever been told. I worked with this lady years ago, decades ago. And she was a single mother and raised her children that way. She said that her husband, I think she might have referred to him as a cull. Anyway, she wound up being a single mom. She said they didn't have much. A lot of times she was concerned about the children not having enough to eat. And she told me there had been times when she brought up her children that she would fix them supper and they would eat, and she would wait until they got finished, and then she would eat what they had left on their plates. That's a mom. That's really loving your children more than yourself. Taking care of your own. What a wonderful thing it is. In Isaiah 41, verse 10, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Behold, all those who were incensed against you shall be ashamed and disgraced. They shall be as nothing, and those who strive with you shall perish. You shall seek them and not find them. Those who contended with you, those who war against you, shall be as nothing, as a non-existent thing. For I, the Lord your God, will hold your hand, saying to you, Fear not, I will help you." As God protects us, so mothers provide a place of refuge for their children. Jesus uses the illustration of a mother hen gathering her chicks underneath her wing. And that's a pretty good illustration for mothers, isn't it? Taking care of her flock, her brood. Folks, even fish take care of their spawn. Have you ever thought about that? God even instilled the mothering ability in animals like fish. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 26 and 27. "In the fear of the Lord there is strong confidence, as his children will have a place of refuge. The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, to turn one away from the snares of death. Folks, where did your relationship with the Lord come from? I am convinced, and I've seen it in my life over and over and over again, that mothers, by and large, are the ones responsible for their children going to heaven. And there can't be a more important role than that, to instill within our children all the teaching that God would have them to know. Have you ever seen a cat teach her kittens how to hunt? Probably have. You could probably come up with a whole bunch of different parallels to that. All kinds of animals do that. Mothers teach their children's all kinds of things, do they not? Danger. Look both ways before you cross the street. Hold my hand in the parking lot. Don't run out in front of that car. I think about all the times that I embarrassed my mother. And I'm telling you, there were several. One time we were in Lewis's food center, and my brother and I discovered that we had dirty hands. So one of us would hold the little thing on the water fountain while the other one washed their hands. She came around the corner and saw us washing our hands in that water fountain, and how embarrassing that was. That was the day we got a serious counseling statement. One time, I believe we were in Piggly Wiggly when a lady sold my brother and I a package of chewing tobacco. We were just little fellas, but we needed that chewing tobacco. And my mother said, "Where did you get that?" That was something she said. She took that chewing tobacco back up to the cash register, and I don't remember everything she said, but I remember how she made that cashier feel for selling that package of chewing tobacco to two little old preteen boys. Well, we lost our chewing tobacco that day. You know, there's a lot of those. There was this store in DeQueen, Arkansas. I think it was called Ben Franklin's. We were in there one day, and I wanted, you know how kids, they'll go along at the cash register, and they always put that candy down there about eye level. That's a marketing strategy, is what they call that. You know, they put that candy and those toys down there about eye level to a child. Well, I wanted that, and I didn't even know how to read. Well, she wouldn't get it for me. Fast forward to the car, and I was sitting in the back seat eating. I think it was Rolaids, but I thought it was Certs when I picked it up. She turned around, and there was that statement, "Where did you get that?" That was the day I learned not to steal. She marched me back across that street. You know, we were right across the street from the courthouse, and the jail was, they could have took me down there and put me in jail, I guess. And I remember that just like it was yesterday. You know some things you don't forget? You tell that lady what you got, where you got it. And I stood there crying. My mama had to pay for it. I didn't have no money. I didn't even know nothing about money. I just knew I wanted some candy off of that. The things that our mothers teach us, how important they are. You probably got some stories too. Thirdly, any good mother wants her children to go to heaven. Now, I cannot imagine. I want you to stop and think about this just for a minute. I cannot imagine the alternative for my child or your child. Don't we want our children to go to heaven? Wouldn't we do everything within our power to see that that takes place? Would you? 1 Corinthians 13:11. Paul said, when I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. We all have to grow up, whether we want to or not. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4. And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. Kind of drops a big load on us, doesn't he? Boys, we want our children to go to heaven. We want them to be good citizens. We want them to respect other people and other people's property. Not just because they might embarrass us, like I did my mother many, many times, but because it's the right thing. You know, just the embarrassment, we can get over that. But eternity, oh, there's so much at stake there. So how important is this role as mother? Proverbs 22:6, train up a child. You probably got it memorized. In the way they should go, and when they're older, they won't depart from it, right? Get that teaching in there early. When they're small, they're developing personality. They're developing character. They're developing habits. In the scriptures, the illustration of the potter and the clay is used. We're molding, just like God is molding you and me here on this earth. So we, as parents, are molding our children. We have to, because there's too much that's at stake. Proverbs 29:15. The rod of rebuke gives wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. Now, I know, and you know, about the rod of rebuke. Now, that might not always be a fly swatter. My mama liked them fly swatters. She knew how to use them. She'd get that fly swatter moving so fast you couldn't even see it. You know, it might be grounding. You know, correction has to be creative. My children, when they were growing up, my wife and I, we would try to be creative, and when they would fight with each other, and some of y'all have done this too, we'd make them sit on the couch and hug each other. And they'd just sit there and cry. I think they'd rather had a whooping. I heard a couple talking about they would do that, and except they would get a big shirt and they'd make both kids fit in the same shirt. They'd have to both wear the same shirt while they hugged each other. Now that's creative punishment, isn't it? Now, one thing, my mother never did You know, she didn't make me miss supper. You can tell that. You know? And I don't ever remember her making me go to bed early. I don't remember her doing it. It was always that immediate, swift punishment. I think that gave her more satisfaction. It gave her a release. You may have to do that some. Proverbs 29:17 says, correct your son, and he will give you rest. Yes, he will give delight to your soul. What a wonderful day it is when we can celebrate our mothers. You know, I never did ever want to be on the outs with my mother. I could be on the outs with a lot of people in this world, but I never did want to disappoint my mother. Even in those times when she disciplined me, that part of me was still there. I wanted everything to be right with her. And I hope that every one of us has that element about us, that we don't want to disappoint our mothers. And I hope that every mother wants the very best for her children, not just in this life, but in eternity. So I'm going to close today with Mark chapter 16, verse 15 and 16. And you might think that this passage of Scripture is out of place in this sermon. No. This is the Great Commission. This is what Jesus told his apostles. By the way, you notice in the Scripture how Jesus took care of his mother? Have you ever noticed in the Scriptures how Jesus, even hanging on the cross, took care of his mother? There's a sermon in itself. The provisions that he made for his mother. Even while being crucified. So he says, Mark records it, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He who believes and is baptized will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned. Offering knowledge. Offering teaching. Giving opportunity for salvation in eternity. Ought to be the primary goal. Not just of mothers and fathers, but to each of us as we go about in this life. How do we go through life? Do we consider ourselves an island to our own? Or are we concerned about others? God's concerned about you. You know, there's something that mothers have that every one of us ought to have. And it's that special attention to detail. That special attention to detail in the lives of other people. that concern. I mentioned how we ought to be concerned about the eternity of our children, to the point that we would go to great lengths and we would have great patience and we would spend enormous amounts of time in prayer and in teaching to make sure that our children are in heaven in eternity with us. And we ought to have that same concern for everybody in our life. I hope this message has been beneficial to you. And if you're here this morning I always offer invitation. Seems redundant. When you obey the gospel, set in motion your walk with Christ. Maybe as preachers sometimes we stand before you and we get to thinking, well, they've heard this invitation every week for eons of time. You obey the gospel because, well, some people obey the gospel out of fear. They don't want to go to hell, and that's a pretty good place to start. Maybe in your walk with Christ, as you grow spiritually and you go through this life and you draw closer to Him, that you quit having to worry so much about that fear, and you love the Lord and you appreciate what He does for you and has done for you and will do for you. And it becomes a walk of love, hopefully, eventually. Somewhere, though, along the way, that walk had to start. Many of you sitting there this morning can probably give credit to your mama for setting good examples for you. Probably a bunch of us. Most of us, probably. Mamas are like that. But you know, sometimes it's like that old Merle Haggard song, Mama Tried. Y'all heard that? Some of you old timers have heard that. She tried to teach me better, but her pleading I denied. That leaves only me to blame, because Mama tried. You know, I didn't even plan on putting that in there this morning. It's hit me all of a sudden. But true. So true it is. And don't let all the trying that Mama did be in vain when you stand before God. If there's anything I can do for you, let me know as we stand and sing.